Hey everyone, lately I've been a bit interested in voting systems, and while there are a host of them to talk about, and I find the prospect of a comparative examination video to have quite a lot of potential, one thing people usually miss when discussing voting systems, particularly in the US, is how one would go about reforming them. Typically, this issue is flat out avoided or portrayed as some insurmountable barrier, and while the latter attitude acknowledges the issue, it's still somewhat wrong. Make no mistake, such a change on a national scale is close to impossible, but it becomes slightly further away from impossible when you realize how changes actually happen, and that is from the bottom up. So taking this bottom-up approach, I now introduce you to fixing voting in America. Okay, so the first thing to do would be to look at your community and decide what voting system would be most feasible there. Due to the sheer size and diversity of US communities and the sheer number of voting systems, there isn't really a one-size-fits-all guide for which system to use when, but I've drafted a couple of basic principles. 1. Avoid changing the number of seats if possible. 2. Remember larger populations give you more leeway to meddle with districts but not seats. Try to prioritize simpler systems, especially if you're banking on the citizens directly voting for the reform. Once you've worked out the end goal, you'll now need to get it changed. Typically, this will entail amending a county or city charter, which means you'll either need to run for office to push the issue or get some representatives who will. If you're unable to get elected and nobody in power will listen to you, then maybe you can petition for a referendum on the issue. The referendum approach allows you to get around your lack of connections or electability through sheer hard work, but remember that if a referendum fails, your community will lose interest in the subject for years to come. So choose wisely, and if you are going to take the referendum approach, perhaps build up some resources and connections, and also consider when to schedule it. Ideally, greater voter turnout works better. Regardless, let's assume you somehow got the reform to pass, and now boom, you've spent months or even years on the easiest part, and your next target will be the state government. Now, to get that change done on a state level, the type of grassroots activism you've worked so hard with needs to be repeated again and again on a larger scale. If you're unable to get noticed by the state government in your effort, then the best hope you have is simply work to try to get other communities to adopt your system, or maybe a different one. This allows a larger section of the citizenry to be informed and increases the odds someone elected to the legislature will care about the issue, and allows growth of electoral reform groups, like maybe what might be yours or a group that you belong to at this point. Regardless of how many communities can switch systems, the end goal is to have enough of a base concerned about the issue to elect or influence the state legislature and governor to either put forward a ballot measure or adopt the change to the state constitution. In some states, ballot measures may be relatively easy due to petitioning rules, similar to at the county level, but remember the same rules apply that did at the local level. Opposition to this will be on a larger scale than before, and remember that ballot failure is worse than legislative failure. Again, think carefully before acting. Now, after years of work, it's safe to assume you've made connections to groups that can try to push your efforts beyond the state, assuming that your state reform is passed. Depending on where you are, this may or may not include you, but if you want to directly make an impact beyond your state borders, you're going to need to be in a high position in some kind of organized national structure. The process outlined earlier may or may not repeat itself until finally enough state legislatures and congressional representatives decide that first past the post is absolute garbage and call for constitutional conventions. At this point, after decades of work, you fixed the electoral process, and now you can start looking into the issues.